Hello, KRUA listeners. It is I, Corey, Truly Evil Bob, and we're going to do an hour of talk about sci-fi, fantasy, and comic books. That's right, you're listening to Capes and Lasers here every Tuesday from noon to 1. And today, I'm going to do a little something different. We usually start with the news, and then we go into a review, and then if I have a guest, or we'll talk about the main subject. Today, we're going to do it opposite. I have a guest in the studio right with me, DJ Spek from Hitchhiking.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going, my man?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Uh, I'm a little flustered, a little late today, but I'm getting it together, getting it all together. So tell me about Hitchhiking. When is it, and what's the show about?
So, Hitchhiking is every Saturday from 7 to 9 p.m. I talk about individual bands each show. Like this Saturday, I'm going to be talking about the Eagles in specific. And from the beginning of the show to the end of the show, I go through their history and how they came to be. And yeah, that's about it.
You just do hard rock like the Eagles, or do you switch it up from genre to genre? Will you do like one on Britney Spears or?
Maybe. I mean, right now I'm not too restricted, which I'm pretty glad with. I'm figuring maybe later down the road I might have some bands that are in Alaska, Anchorage, from that time, and I can
Oh
have them
yeah.
come in and talk about their story, and that'd be pretty cool. So I don't think I'll be restricting it to 70s, 80s, 60s, or anything like that.
Well, I look forward to that. So I have you on the show to talk about your bit of fandom, your bit of uh, fantasy fandom that you like. You just started out playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, definitely. I started last year, but we didn't play too often.
So for those of you not in the know, Dungeons and Dragons is a role playing game. It's a board game that you get together and you play roles. It's not like you move your piece down through spaces and collect money or anything like that. Well, you do collect money, but it's more of you're taking on an improvisational role. You're playing a character and you're giving life. You're breathing life into this character by improvising that role during the play. And the rules in Dungeons and Dragons at least dictate how your character succeeds at challenges. So if you want to jump over a gorge, you have to roll a dice to see if you make that jump. If you want to kill the goblin, you have to make a roll to see how well you kill the goblin, or if you just wound him. So that's the premise of Dungeons and Dragons. It is a fantasy, of course, based role playing game. There are many different kinds. There are sci-fi ones. There are superhero ones. But the most popular, of course, is Dungeons and Dragons, created way back in the 70s by the iconic Gary Gygax. And yeah, if you don't know, like, it's in modern media now everywhere. It used to be underground when I started playing. It used to be what Christian moms railed against. But tell me about your experience. So, how did you get into Dungeons and Dragons? Where'd you find it?
It started out with my friends. I mean, I always kind of knew about it in the background, but my friends decided that they would start up a little group and they'd play, and I was kind of interested, and I tried it, and I liked it a lot because it let me escape my life for a couple hours and see what it's like to be in the feet or the boots of a hero that's off to save a damsel in distress or kill a dragon. And I thought it was really fun. Uh, what I like about it is that the rules can vary from DM to DM, and DM stands for Dungeon Master.
He's the arbiter of the game. There's one of the players doesn't play a character. He basically tells you what's happening in the world.
Yeah, uh, each DM can play their own separate game differently than other DMs can do it. They can give you some leniency. There we go. That's the word I'm trying to think of. Or they can have no mercy out and just try to destroy your players, which would be kind of weird.
um, so Dungeons and Dragons is different from a lot of board games as well because these things they don't end per se. When you end an adventure or end your gaming session, you can come back the next time and pick up right where you left off and continue the story of your characters as they, you know, are doing whatever they're doing, drinking at the bar, or going out killing the evil wizard, or hunting dragons, or trying to become king of an entire kingdom. So these things can last years. In fact, I've been in a role playing game that has lasted quite a long time. 8 years, I think, is the longest
Holy
one.
moly.
I know, right? I'm a veteran at role playing games. I started when I was 8, back in the early 80s with basic Dungeons and Dragons, and since then I've gone through a whole host of iterations of the game, many different worlds, many different characters. Uh, I come to call stories about my characters like war stories, or if any of you have checked out my YouTube channel, Truly Evil Bob, on YouTube, I have a segment called Tavern Tales, where I have people come on and tell their favorite story, their favorite time they ever had playing a game like Dungeons and Dragons or other role playing games, and
Wow.
it's really fun.
How long have you been doing that segment on your YouTube channel?
About a year and a half.
Man,
Yeah. So, how about you? You have a favorite instance, a favorite like cool moment that either happened to you, or like an epic fail that was just so much fun?
I think it's funny. A couple weeks ago, me and my brother were playing with his friend, and he was playing as a barbarian, and we were fighting this one-eyed monster that was very it was like telepathic. Um, we were about to kill it, and I was down, and he decided to do an attack that was very high risk, and I didn't want him to do it, and then he rolled a 20,
Oh, that's
which
always
it's a
yeah.
critical success, and he split the thing in half, and we were all laughing because I was like, "Don't do it, no!"
It's
But
like I'm gonna take the risk and it pays off. And
yeah, it was funny because I was doubting him so much. But surprises can happen in D&D, and that's awesome.
hmm Hey, it's a good risk for him because if he fails, nothing happens to him. It's all you.
Yeah, he ended up doing like a double front flip because he got a 20 on his acrobatics roll too. It was amazing.
So, where do you see yourself playing this game over and over for the next, like, possibly through college?
Definitely, I enjoy it so much, and I have lots of friends that enjoy it almost as much as I do. Right now, I'm getting into the depths of becoming a dungeon master myself, so that way I can try to provide story as a narrative, and make people feel the way I did a couple weeks ago. I ended up playing a survival horror version of D&D, and it sent shivers up my spine. And I just thought it was so amazing how D&D can do that to someone while they're just sitting in a room and a table across from each other.
So, let's get to the dungeon mastering part, the narrating, the arbiter, game arbiter part. There are many different ways to play Dungeons and Dragons. Like you just noticed, you can do like a survival horror. There's an entire setting specifically for that called Ravenloft, which is really cool. There's a Ravenloft playthrough on my channel. Uh, yes, going back to that again. Um, but there are specific ways each player can play the game, and specific ways game masters can uh, uh, have their different kinds of flavors too. Um, for example, some people are called like munchkins or power gamers or min maxers. And what they do is instead of making a character that is tailored to a personality, instead the characters is tailored to the best way to quote unquote defeat the game, to survive it and get the best loot and keep that character rolling forward. And this can be done at the hindrance of role play. Like, for example, when you're trying to get information out of a contact and he's being rather stubborn, a min maxer, instead of figuring out what the guy's problem is and solving that problem, will go, if you don't do this, I'm just going to kill you. And that can be a problem for some game masters. Some game masters encourage that. It's the difference between role play as in ROLE and role play as in rolling the dice, ROLL. Where do you see you going with the play of your character and being the arbiter of the game?
In D&D, I prefer to think of it as like a role-playing game as an ROLE. I like the fact that you can have this very intricate story and all these pieces that fit together, but at the same time, if you have players that are gonna kill off every single goblin they see, it's not gonna go too far because they won't be able to get information if they're chopping off heads.
Mm,
in a very fast motion. You know.
well, some people it says when it comes to goblins, goblins are evil. You just kill them and move on, right? But let's say it's an informant. That same attitude can be done to like a sniveling informant, where and I think that that does hamper gameplay, and a lot of people try and get min maxers out of the game. Do you find D&D groups like you were just playing with your friends? Have you ever played with a group that's not your friends? I know at Bosco's every either Wednesday or Thursday night they do D&D encounters, and you just play with strangers. And every other Saturday there's a group called the Pathfinder Society, and they play sometimes at Bosco, sometimes out of the library. The library, what's that library called? The big one,
Lusac.
Lusac. Yeah, they play out of there, and you just play with strangers, and they have guidelines on make sure that people don't cheat. Um, and people say, "Hey," I know a lot of people who really like it say, "Hey, these are the most uh, inviting people I've ever been with. They want you to come in, they want you to play." But I notice that's not always the case in my experience. There are people who get frustrated if um, some min maxers get frustrated when you don't min max your character. Why didn't you give yourself this stat? Everybody should have this stat, you know, and it makes the game frustrating. Have you run into that yet?
I have not, mostly because the groups that we've made, we focus on role playing, ROLE, uh, specifically. But I know that there are people like that, and that's definitely okay. You just have to find your group that you have your DM that makes very battle encouraged
Mm-hmm.
games. But
Have you run into a situation where there's a plan that you as a group have come up with, and somebody deviates from that plan, and
Leroy
everybody
Jenkins.
is just like, "What are you doing?" And it's so frustrating. And you kind of, um, what what I'm asking is, has there ever been a point where an in-game uh, altercation has led to an out-of-game tension?
There was a moment a couple weeks ago, but it didn't rise too much, mostly because the person that caused the altercation decided that D&D wasn't for him,
Hmm.
or maybe it was just with us. I'm not too
They
sure.
so he just took himself out.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, he definitely had a different way of thinking. It also might have been the fact that we were under high tension and no one was really trying to come up with a solution. We're all just like, "What do we do?" And then he just decided to go knock on a door, and it was kind of funny because one of our players turned into a gecko and he was going to sneak under the door. And right before he got to the door, the guy knocked on the door, and they had these dragon cultists, and they opened up, and it was just this whole thing. It caused a battle that probably wasn't necessary, but it was funny. It was very funny.
I am guilty of sometimes when I won't, if a plan is made, I'll always go along with the plan. But sometimes in the play of my character, if we spend too much time table talking, planning things out, and nothing is getting done because everybody is paralyzed with what to do next, uh, I will do something perhaps stupid to trigger an event just to propel the game forward. And sometimes people hate me for that. And I make no apologies for that, because I'm not here to just sit around and spin my wheels all day.
Yeah,
I'm here
definitely.
to play a game. And if nothing is happening in the game, I make something happen.
Yeah.
And that's not for everybody, I know.
I mean, I can add a lot of fun to the game, where you have to improvise on your feet, and that's a great aspect of it too. Sometimes the DM does this, sometimes player do that, but it's that's a great way to get your brain to think about what you should do, and that's yeah, I can add fun to it.
So there's a ton of role playing games out there. You've only played Dungeons and Dragons right now.
Uh,
Have you
when it
tried?
comes to tabletop games, yes, but I'm open to playing a lot more.
Have you played like a video game that's based on a role playing game that's not Dungeons and
I
Dragons?
mean, would you
There's
consider Skyrim kind of like
no,
that,
that's not based on a tabletop role playing game. There's, for example,
or
there
RuneScape?
a couple out there. Shadowrun.
I've played a version of that on Xbox.
Yeah,
It was a
there's the
first-person
Shadowrun
shooter.
game. These are properties that started out as tabletop role playing games and became video games. So Numenera has a video game out for it
I've
called
never heard of
Torment
it.
Numenera. It's really good. It's more like a an interactive storytelling experience with some gameplay added to it. That's it's I love it. I can't get enough of it. And it inspired me to run a tabletop Numenera game that I do every other Saturday. So why is it every other Saturday? You know how I said Pathfinder does every other Saturday?
Yeah.
Uh, the coordinator for the entire Pathfinder Society in Anchorage,
Is he part of your group?
he's part of my group.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I like I said, I've been doing role playing games a lot. It's a huge part of my life, and I hope it continues to become part of your life. I know as you're going to graduate college and move on to a job, or perhaps marry your sweetheart and have a family, it becomes harder and harder to game. And I've had a lot of friends who struggle to make time for role playing during their adult life, whereas when they were a kid in school, it was just like you just did it because
Yeah.
everybody the scheduling conflict wasn't too bad.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself like as an old man sitting around a table rolling some dice?
I would like to be an old man like that, but also uh, there's a lot of context about that. I mean, it really depends on who my significant other would be and if they're okay with that. My children, if they need special care and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I know that my friend, right now, he has like two jobs. He's going to full time school, and he wants to play D&D, and he has a girlfriend, and he definitely has to manage his time with that. He wants to spend time with his girlfriend, so we're playing every other week.
So the girlfriend thing is an interesting thing because right now most people think of role playing as a male thing, like especially Dungeons and Dragons. But there's a whole group of female role players out there. They don't play Dungeons and Dragons as much. They like games like more dramatic games that work more on the role playing rather than the combat. Games like Seventh Sea, games like Vampire the Masquerade, games like Legend of the Five Rings, which do more on the drama rather than the combat adds to the drama, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And over and over, these uh, when you talk about role players and their love lives, there's always the significant other. I did the quotes, the air quotes that uh, are forced to come into the game and hopefully become converts, and that's kind of the language that role players use. Oh yeah, we're looking for this person to become converts, and that usually doesn't happen. Usually. I know one friend who successfully had that happen. Otherwise, they're two separate parts of their lives. Um, I have been lucky in my love life. Most of the girls I have dated in my life actually role play, and a lot of times we met through that hobby.
That's awesome.
I know. So if you think you can't meet women, if you're a guy and you think you can't meet women through the hobby, you're wrong. There are plenty of awesome catches out there that are just, you know, waiting for a good person. If you're a woman, of course there are many guys, and if you're a guy, don't think that it. Role playing is a social thing, and so you're gonna make friends and you're gonna make connections. I have to do a quick break. In fact, I'm a little late on this break, and we'll come back and we'll talk some more. Welcome back to Capes and Lasers. I am Corey,
I am.
truly evil Bob, and our guest today is.
Hello.
Go ahead,
I
introduce
am
yourself,
DJ Spek. I run hitchhiking every Saturday.
and remind everybody what that is.
I talk about the history of bands every Saturday from 7 to 9 p.m. Yeah,
Yeah,
play their music and stuff like that.
little documentarian here. And this is Capes and Lasers, the show about sci-fi, fantasy, and comic books. And today we're talking with DJ Specs here about his newest hobby, Dungeons and Dragons, role-playing games. And we went through a lot of the different kind of troubles you can come upon in role playing games, and a lot of the different things that are fun in role playing games. The unexpectedness, the fantasy of it, um, especially the different worlds you can ingratiate yourself, like put yourself into. Uh, so Dungeons and Dragons is mostly just fantasy with dragons and stuff, but there's so much more out there, especially inside Dungeons and Dragons. Inside Dungeons and Dragons, you have different fantasy worlds that have kind of different rules to them, like Forgotten Realms and Al Qadim, which is like Arabian Nights and stuff like that. Karatur, which is like Asian flavored fantasy. Seriously, all of this stuff is out there.
I've never really heard of these, but it's got me enticed to
Yeah,
play
there's
some more.
Eberron is is a world that has come back from the brink of war, and they used golems called war forges to fight their wars for them, like giant magical robots,
Man,
and they got sentient, and now there are like just people that are trying to fit into society now that the war's over, but there are these killer robots that are trying to like be adventurers or open taverns or
that's awesome.
um, above Dungeons and Dragons, there are more games out there, different fantasy games. There's one for Lord of the Rings, the Middle Earth role playing game setting. If you want that kind of exact setting, Roll Master, Pathfinder. They're all basic fantasy worlds with different, like the details are different.
Yeah.
So the broad strokes are the same, but the details are a bit different. And with the rule systems are different too. So if you don't like the level system of Dungeons and Dragons and you'd rather have a skill based system, there's stuff out there that'll accommodate you. If you don't like fantasy, if you like science fiction, there's a Star Wars role playing game, many iterations of the Star Wars role playing game with many different types of rules. There's like a Dungeons and Dragons version of Star Wars called Saga Edition. I really enjoy Saga Edition. There's actually 3 versions of the D20 Star Wars, and the best I think is Saga. There's the D6 Star Wars, and there's the new Fantasy Flight Star Wars, which uses weird symbols on dice. There's a new Star Trek role playing game out. There's many iterations of that. There's a Serenity, like Firefly RPG. There's a Xena and Hercules RPG. There's a Ghostbusters RPG.
I'm learning so much today. I knew there were different types, but I didn't know it went to this depth, and
Oh,
it's awesome.
there's so much out there for people to find their exact niche. Superhero RPGs, there's a lot of those. There's a DC one, there's a Marvel one. So if you like, playing mutants or like Avengers, you got that. If you want to play Justice League or Green Lanterns or Batman heroes, you got that. There are generic ones out there like Champions. There's a Palladium one that's just awful. Mutants and Masterminds is a D21 like Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, excuse me, people. I'm very sorry. But it's actually really good. And I adore Mutants and Masterminds. There's an anime role playing game out there. It's defunct right now. I think there's different ones out there, but the one I liked the best was Big Eye Small Mouth, and it's now defunct. If you can find a copy of that, I prefer second edition revised. If you can find that, um, yeah, there's so much out there. There's horror, the horror genre, like in Dungeons and Dragons. There's Ravenloft, but there are other games just devoted to that. Like Call of Cthulhu has its own role playing game where you're not going to be as competent as you are. You're like in Dungeons and Dragons, you're like an awesome fighter or a magic user that throws fireballs. In like the superhero game, you can punch through walls, and in fantasy games, you can shoot lasers and destroy a planet. In Call of Cthulhu, you have a camera and you can take photographs, and you can read. I'm really good at reading books, and
There you go.
but the it's all about the kind of helplessness you are in the face of the unknown. And there's a stat in the game called madness. And the more you kind of delve into this unknown of the Cthulian mythos, the more you understand that all of your reality is not what it seems to be. And you slowly go mad. And the madder you get, the more less control you get over your character.
That sounds scary.
There's also Vampire the Masquerade and the World of Darkness. It's vampire werewolf. Uh, there's all sorts of like the World of Darkness has any supernatural monster stuff you can imagine. You can play. You want to play a Frankenstein monster? They got it. You want to play a mummy? They got that too. You want to play ghosts? You can play. There's an entire setting called Wraith that's all about being ghosts
Man.
and haunting people.
Ooh, spooky.
So you had a subject you wanted to bring up.
Oh yeah. So a lot of people think that D&D is it can be an expensive hobby, but it can also be a very cheap one. You don't really need anything to start your own game. You just need to have an imagination, and if you don't want to buy dice, I know there are online dice rollers for you where they have the selective dice where you can just push a button and it
No,
rolls the dice for you.
no one likes online dice rollers. Everybody likes to have those dice in their hands. Trust me. And they have their favorite dice, and they have lucky dice.
Yeah.
And
I have a set of purple dice that are my lucky dice.
I like your purple dice. They're really pretty. Dice are like jewelry for nerds.
That's the perfect way to
It
sum it
is,
up.
right? Yeah, yeah. But yeah, it's a low cost of entry. You can find games out there as cheap as $20 for the rules books. Dungeons and Dragons is about $70 for the three core books. You need these three core books,
I
and
I let my head sink down into shame. This past couple weeks, I've probably spent over $250 on
it
starting up my own little
it can
DM.
get expensive, but you don't need to buy all of that stuff.
You don't have to.
If you do a lot of games, like for example, the one I'm running is called Numenera. All you need is just the core book. Anything, and that core book will cost you about $45. That's it. The core book and some dice, and you're off. That's it. That has everything you need for being a player, everything you need for being a game master or the rules arbiter. All the monsters are in there, all of the setting, everything, rules. You're done. And that's how most games are. Dungeons and Dragons is different. That you need three books to run a game. Most games is you get the core book, and everything else is icing on the cake. And if you want to like expand, that's the thing. Once you start playing these games and making a campaign, a series of games that players are being brought to back to over and over, you kind of want that extra stuff.
Yeah, it draws you in.
Yeah, it really does. But you don't have to get it all at once. You can space it out. And
I mean, like you don't. I mean, honestly, if you have an idea of how to play D&D or any type of role playing game, you can kind of create your own system where you don't have to buy the rule book. Uh,
you have to understand what a role playing game is and kind of what the rule sets already out there are before you can. Like, if someone just did that, I've never played a role playing game before. I made a role playing game. I would super be impressed. That's why Gary Gygax is so iconic, because that's what he did. But yeah, there's really a low cost of entry on this. Um, oh, I was gonna talk about something else, and it kind of flew out of my brain at the last second.
um,
Oh well.
Yeah, I mean, like my friend made his own little universe where he had people from like Street Fighter and Legend of Zelda. They all came in and they tied in together in the same realm.
Oh, that's neat.
And
By
yeah,
the way, there's a Street Fighter role playing game, Street Fighter 2 role playing game, published by White Wolf Publishing. It's now defunct, but you can still find copies out there. It is terrible. There's a WWF role playing game.
really,
Yes,
that's ew.
a WWF. This was made back when it was the WWF, not WW Entertainment,
Yeah.
Worldwide Entertainment. So
Roll for stability. No.
I think there might be a WCW one too. I don't know. That's not my bag.
Yeah.
But I remember definitely seeing the WWF one.
That's amazing.
I know. That's the thing about, you can do anything you want in these role playing games. You can take the system that you like and try and modify it to uh, put in the things that you want. And there's no limit but your imagination and the amount of effort you put into it.
Definitely.
And oh, that's what I want to talk about. You were talking about digital stuff.
Yeah.
There are ways to play Dungeons and Dragons online and other role playing games. All of these other role playing games online. There are several resources that you can use. The first is, of course, you can just open up a video chat room like,
Skype or something.
Skype or
Discord.
Discord. Yeah. And you can just do it through that. But there are things that encapsulate your maps and your miniatures and uh, your character sheets and dice rollers all in one. Tabletop Simulator you can get through Steam, and that has like a three-dimensional environment to it. It's all right, but it doesn't work for everything. And I really enjoy Roll20, roll20.net. And that has, if you watch my channel on Julie Evil Bob channel, you see my playthroughs. We use roll20.net because it has different video chats integrated into it, a map area that's simple, character sheets that are simple, and a die roller. So it's not hard to use. Unfortunately, it's a little glitchy sometimes for some people, which can slow the game down. Um, yeah, a lot of times people are like, "Oh, getting the technical bugs out is like half the game, and then
Yeah.
we can play for the other half." Also, online game has a bit of a more impersonal nature. It goes a little slower. It's not. I don't think people get as good of a connection with other characters as they would sitting across the table from somebody and role playing with them directly.
Yeah.
I know in a lot of role playing games, there are characters that are. You get a gaming group together and you get these characters with these different personalities that you're playing, and you suddenly link to another character. And, we're the best of buddies. We always got each other's back. And I don't see that happening as much in Roll20, in the Roll20 environment, on online environments.
Yeah.
So that's a pitfall of that. But if you can't play, if you don't have a gaming group that is totally with you, like I'm new to the Anchorage area this year, so I want to keep my old gaming group and we play on Roll20. And then I have a new gaming group here that I play around the table. Yeah, I know I'm incorrigible, aren't I?
It's awesome.
And coming up on our channel, we're doing a Dungeons and Dragons game based on the setting called Orcs of Thar, and everybody's playing a goblinoid, and they're going to
Really?
go invade the Elven Woods and
That's
liberate a immortal artifact.
that's amazing. Who came up with that?
All of my players said we haven't been role playing lately because I've been very busy with school and work and getting my life situated here in Anchorage, and they got grumbly at me
Hmm.
and said, we want to role play." And then one person's like, "Yeah, and I want to role play goblins." And everybody was like, "Yes, let's role play goblins." And here I am writing a goblin adventure for them because that's the kind of guy I am.
Are you gonna be posting that on your YouTube channel?
I will be posting this. This will be done through Roll20, and I'll be posting it on my YouTube channel. Yes.
That's awesome. I wanna hear about this. It sounds
You'll be
amazing.
able to see it when it comes out in about 2 weeks. 2 weeks, I'd give it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that we're done here with you, DJ Spek.
Alrighty.
I want to thank you for coming and sharing your experiences with this new hobby you're having, and I invite everybody to play because if you love fantasy, if you love sci-fi, there's something there for everybody.
Definitely. I'm glad to be on here. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.
Yeah.
Listen to Hitchhiking at what time again?
7 to 9 p.m. on every Saturday.
Do it, guys. All right, DJ Spek. We're gonna when we come back after the break, we are going to talk about the new Star Trek Discovery. And is it good? Is it bad? Should you be paying CBS? All of that stuff coming up right after the break. Welcome back to Capes and Lasers. I'm sorry about that. A little technical hiccup there. I am Corey, truly evil Bob. This is Capes and Lasers, the show about sci-fi, fantasy, and comic books. I just want to thank again DJ Spec for coming and talking about role-playing games for the past 40 minutes with me. It was a great interview, and I was happy to have him. But now we're going to move on to to the, kind of the news, but more of a review of Star Trek Discovery. This week has been this this kind of time. This month has been really good to science fiction. Rick and Morty is back, but the season finale is this weekend, and I'm sorry to see it go again. It came and went way too fast for me, but there are so many great epic episodes in this season of Rick and Morty. If you haven't seen that show, I highly recommend it. The Orville came out this last month, and it's been getting mixed reviews. People who like the old Star Trek seem to resonate with Orville, but the critics are not liking it too much. I don't know if it's clicking with the millennial people, but people of the old Trek, people who love the old Trek, seem to really like Orville. Uh, I'm not sure if Orville I a couple weeks ago I said Orville was a parody, and that's how we should uh, view that, as a parody of Star Trek. This last episode, there's been 3 episodes out so far. This last episode had very little jokes in it and felt more like a Star Trek episode. It took on a moral issue, um, and all of the scenes felt like Star Trek: The Next Generation, like a tribute to it rather than a parody. I don't know what Orville is now. Uh, is I don't think it's a parody anymore. Maybe I was wrong in putting it in that category. I really wish I really wish I could see like all of it before making these kind of judgments. But I can only make the judgments on what I see. And so far I'm not sure what Orville is. Is it a parody? Is it a tribute show? Is it its own thing, and should it be judged as its own thing? And if so, I don't know. I think I would side on with the critics. Uh, I believe that the critics have it right, that the show is a bit bland and a bit boring in the places where it's trying to make a moral stand or trying to continue the drama. Uh, Blade Runner, the new Blade Runner movie, is coming out in a few short weeks. I am psyched for it. So if you are a fan of sci-fi, this is like a great time for you, isn't it? Even more so since the new Star Trek just dropped, Star Trek Discovery. The first episode was free on CBS on the night it dropped, the same night it dropped on online. And there's some problems. There are some problems here. Now let me not bury the lead. I love it. I think it is excellent. But that said, um, there are a few things that need to be addressed. By the way, the critics seem to love it too. Critical reviews are positive. Fan reviews, people I know that are fans of the Star Trek genre, seem to be discouraged. So the first thing I think is a problem is that they only showed the first episode on CBS. Online, there were 2 episodes. The first of these episodes I thought was rather dry, rather boring. It was a big setup episode. There was a mystery that needed to be solved. And some of the actions that these characters took seem out of place, especially out of place in Star Trek. Once you see the second episode, it all clicks into place. And the reveals are there, and the reveals are good. And there's this epic space war, and it is amazing. I encourage everybody to just do the free trial, watch that second episode, make your opinion then, because I thought, as kind of tedious as that first one was, the second one is so action packed, so incredibly in your face that it makes up for everything. So let's start with some of the aesthetics of this new Star Trek Discovery. People said, I don't know if it feels like Star Trek. The biggest in your face thing is the Klingons look totally different. And I can see that. It's a bit jarring to go, what, those are Klingons? What happened to their like bandolier? What happened to their, like, they still have the ridge forehead, but their entire faces are totally different. They don't seem to have the facial hair. Their coloring is very alien. They look extremely alien, and a lot of people they don't like this. And I kind of like the look of them. I I'm okay with this. When they went from the old Trek to the new Star Trek Next Generation in the movies, they revised the Klingons. When that happened, I have no problem with them revising them again. My concern is they keep making Klingons instead. They keep making Klingons look more and more alien, more and more monstrous. Actually, you can look at them and go, "Oh, that's the bad guy." Well, how do I know? Because he looks like a monster. And that kind of non-nuance that they have there, uh, there's no relatability to the character. You can't like they're obviously the villain because look at them. That's what a villain looks like. And other races in Star Trek have not gotten the same treatment. You don't see Vulcans being more and more alien looking. They have remained pretty much the same throughout all of Star Trekdom. No matter what timeline, what show, when it was produced, Vulcans look like Vulcans. Yet you gotta futz with Klingons. And so people didn't like that. And yeah, yeah, I can definitely see why they wouldn't do that. The Klingon ships also look nothing like the Klingon ships that you see in the other series. The red lighting's gone. It looks more like they look like cathedrals. These ships. So let's get to the Federation and their. Let's talk about these set pieces because the Klingon cathedral ship looks amazing. And the set pieces on the Federation ships are also amazing. They're these huge, expansive bridge and quarters, and the cinematography is wonderful in them. Sure, there's a bit of lens flare as a nod to the new Trek movies, but really, like these set pieces are amazing looking. I want to walk onto these sets because they are um I get a feel from them, like an epic feel. Like this is uh, a place where the future actually lives. You know, these aren't the wooden sets or the plywood sets that they had in the past. These things make you feel like you're actually in the future. And then you come upon the thing that the complaint everybody has. Oh, this is supposed to be a prequel. Why do things look more advanced, not less advanced? Shut up. These things look great, and I want them to look great. I know they have holograph technology, hologram communicators, and they never had those in the other series. That's okay. That's okay by me. It's still the future. Everything is still the future. The uniforms are super detailed and super crafted. They are amazing to look at. Um, the the attention to detail in this series is on a whole new level, and it should be enjoyed for that. I think that all of that hard work should be very much appreciated. I know how hard it is to put on a production, a theater production, or a video production, and how much work goes into these things. They put a lot of work and a lot of care into these things, and it shows. It really does. So let's talk about the pacing of this of Star Trek Discovery. It is not like any other Star Trek series you have seen. In fact, it looks and feels more like Battlestar Galactica. So in the past, in most Star Trek shows, there is a episodic nature to it. There's something that they're dealing with, and by the end of the episode, it's resolved and everything resets to how it used to be. And then they move on to the next episode and it starts fresh. Here, we're doing more of a serialized story. Every episode leads to the next episode, and what happens in the last episode has profound effects on the entire series going forward. Characters will change and develop as they go. In the original Trek, Gene Roddenberry actually didn't want that. He wanted these characters static because he thought that the the storytelling, the moral dilemmas that you would come upon in the future were more important than the crafting of the characters. Here, it's the reverse. These characters and their stories are way more important than the the overarching thing that surrounds them. How they react to the story is more important than the dilemma that they're in. And while that's not saying that the dilemmas don't matter, uh, it's it means that there's a lot of more character growth, and that this main character that you see go from first officer to uh, being kicked out of Starfleet and then coming back in, that that whole story arc is a much more personal thing. It feels, if you're a fan of Deep Space Nine, you might like this a lot more because Deep Space Nine had a more serialized feel. It wasn't 100% serialized, it was very episodic, but they actually had the characters grow and change during Deep Space Nine. Uh, I really wish everybody would go and watch the second episode before making their judgments on this. But overall, I like Star Trek Discovery. I am very much looking forward to the next episode as much as I'm looking forward to watching Blade Runner or Thor Ragnarok coming out. And I think if you don't like this first episode they gave out for free, you should find a way to watch a little more. Give it another chance. That's my recommendation. If you don't like Star Trek, of course you're not going to like this. If you liked Battlestar Galactica, you probably like this because it feels like Battlestar Galactica. Whereas, Orville, if you like the old Trek, go watch Orville. Orville is just like the old Trek in almost every single way. Well, that's my time here on Capes and Lasers. I will be back next Wednesday at noon to 1, your lunch hour. Listen to it while you have lunch. And hey, I'll see you then. Have a great day.